Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to argue that Homer Simpson from The Simpsons presents one of the most psychologically fascinating portrayals of alcoholism in all of animated television, and possibly in all of television period. And by examining his constant drinking, his use of alcohol for emotional regulation, how drinking shapes his marriage, his fatherhood, his friendships, and his sense of identity, we can understand alcoholism as something far more complex than the stereotypes suggest. We can understand it as a quiet, persistent force that reshapes an entire life without ever announcing itself as a crisis. This video examines Homer's alcohol use from an observational perspective, focusing on patterns shown across actual episodes spanning more than 3 decades of the show. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Alcoholism as narrative constant. When The Simpsons premiered in December 1989, the very first episodes established something about Homer Simpson that has remained remarkably consistent across 35 seasons and counting. Homer drinks beer constantly. This is not something that developed gradually as the show matured, or something that appeared as a later character addition once the writers needed to give Homer more depth. From the earliest episodes of the series, Homer is shown drinking Duff beer at home, drinking at Moe's Tavern, drinking at work functions, and drinking during moments of celebration and crisis alike. This immediate establishment of alcohol as central to Homer's character is psychologically significant, because it tells us that drinking is not separate from who Homer is. It is woven into his identity, his daily routine, and how he moves through his world in ways that the people around him have simply stopped noticing. A psychologist observing Homer across the full run of the series would note that his relationship with Duff Beer and with Moe's Tavern is as defining to his character as his job at the Springfield nuclear power plant, or his relationship with his wife Marge. His daily life follows a predictable pattern that revolves around alcohol. He goes to work, he comes home, and he goes to Moe's Tavern, or he goes to work, comes home, and drinks on the couch in front of the television. The drinking is not something Homer does occasionally when the mood strikes him, or when a special occasion calls for it. It is the organizing principle of his free time and the background texture of nearly every scene he appears in, across hundreds and hundreds of episodes. The episode Duffless from Season 4 provides one of the earliest and most psychologically revealing examinations of just how deeply alcohol is embedded in Homer's functioning. In this episode, Homer is arrested for drunk driving after visiting the Duff Brewery with his friend Barney Gumble. He is forced to attend traffic school and Alcoholics Anonymous meetings as a result of the arrest. At his first AA meeting, Reverend Lovejoy explains to the group that after completing the program, they will never drink a beer again. Homer's response to hearing this is immediate and visceral. He screams and runs out of the room. He does not pause to consider whether sobriety might benefit his life. He does not weigh the costs and benefits of continued drinking. He simply panics at the very idea of permanent separation from alcohol, and flees from the room like someone running from physical danger. A psychologist would observe that this reaction reveals something important about the depth of Homer's psychological attachment to drinking. The prospect of never having another beer does not register as a health decision or a lifestyle choice for Homer. It registers as an existential threat, as something so frightening that his body's fight or flight response activates and sends him running before his conscious mind can even process the information. Later in the same episode, after Marge persuades Homer to try giving up beer for just 1 month rather than forever, something remarkable happens. Over the course of 30 days without alcohol, Homer's physical health improves visibly. His belly shrinks. He saves over $100 that would have gone to beer. He exhibits what the show describes as more positive changes in his behavior and his presence within the family. The connection between sobriety and improved functioning is presented clearly and without ambiguity. When Homer stops drinking, measurable improvements appear in nearly every area of his life. A psychologist would note that this kind of rapid improvement when alcohol is removed suggests that the drinking was actively suppressing Homer's potential and actively degrading his health, his finances, and his family relationships on a continuous basis. The alcohol was not just something Homer consumed. It was something that was consuming parts of his life that he could not see because the drinking prevented him from seeing them. At the end of that 30-day period, Homer walks back into Moe's tavern with money in hand, ready to resume drinking immediately. Marge points out to him that just because his alcohol-free month is over does not mean he has to jump right back into drinking the moment it ends. Homer goes to the bar anyway. But when he arrives and looks around at the other barflies, at the toll that years of heavy drinking have taken on the men sitting on those bar stools, something stops him. He tells Moe to save his drink and he goes home to Marge instead. The episode ends with Homer and Marge riding Lisa's bicycle into the sunset together, a moment of genuine warmth and connection that sobriety made possible. It is one of the most hopeful endings in the show's entire run, and yet, by the next episode, Homer is drinking again at his usual levels as if none of it ever happened. A psychologist would find this pattern deeply significant because it mirrors exactly how addiction functions in real life. The person gains insight, experiences improvement, recognizes the benefits of sobriety, and then returns to the substance anyway because the pull of dependency is stronger than the pull of insight. The episode Homer versus the 18th Amendment from Season 8 demonstrates just how far Homer will go to maintain his access to alcohol. When Prohibition hits Springfield after Bart accidentally gets drunk on beer sprayed from a duff float during a Saint Patrick's Day parade, the town is forced to ban all alcohol. The news causes all of Springfield's known alcoholics to faint simultaneously, including Homer, Moe, Barney, and others. This is played for comedy, but a psychologist would note that the fainting response, even as a comedic exaggeration, represents the genuine panic and physiological distress that people with severe alcohol dependency experience when their access to the substance is threatened or removed. Homer's response to Prohibition is not to accept the new reality and find alternative ways to spend his time. His response is to become the beer baron. He sneaks out to the city dump at night with his son Bart to reclaim buried beer barrels. He sets up a bootlegging operation in his basement, pouring beer into hollow bowling balls and using an elaborate system of underground pipes to transport them from the Bowl-O-Rama to Moe's Tavern. He risks arrest, punishment, and separation from his family, all to ensure that alcohol continues flowing through Springfield. When the beer from the barrels runs out, he attempts to manufacture his own hard liquor, which proves difficult because his stills keep exploding and he has to place a suspicious order for 42 bathtubs that attracts attention. Even after catching fire in his own basement from one of these attempts, Homer only agrees to stop when Marge tells him directly that she is concerned for his safety. The episode ends with Homer giving a toast that has become one of the most quoted lines in television history: to alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. A psychologist would observe that this line, delivered with warmth and sincerity and played for a laugh from the audience, is actually one of the most psychologically honest statements Homer ever makes about his relationship with drinking. He recognizes, at least in that moment, that alcohol creates problems in his life, but he simultaneously cannot imagine navigating life's difficulties without it. He sees alcohol as both the disease and the medicine, and he has made peace with that contradiction rather than trying to resolve it. The episode Mommy Beerest from Season 16 shows yet another dimension of how central alcohol is to Homer's life and how far he will go to protect his access to it. When a health inspector shuts down Moe's Tavern after discovering serious code violations, Homer takes out a second mortgage on his family's home to finance the tavern's reopening. He literally puts his family's housing security at risk to ensure that his primary drinking establishment remains operational. A psychologist would note that this decision reveals Homer's priorities in a way that no amount of dialogue could. When forced to choose between financial stability for his wife and children and the continued existence of the bar where he drinks, Homer chooses the bar without apparent hesitation or significant internal conflict. The drinking environment is more important to his psychological functioning than the economic security of the people who depend on him. Across 35 seasons, Homer's relationship with alcohol has remained essentially unchanged, despite countless experiences that might reasonably have led to modification of the behavior. He has been arrested for drunk driving. He has been shown the health benefits of sobriety. He has been confronted by family members about his drinking. He has seen the destructive effects of alcohol on friends like Barney. He has experienced moments of clarity where he recognized the damage drinking causes. And yet none of these experiences have produced lasting change in his drinking patterns. The beer remains. The visits to Moe's continue. The couch drinking persists. A psychologist would observe that this level of consistency across decades of varied life experiences indicates either profound denial that prevents Homer from recognizing a need to change, or psychological dependence so severe that change feels impossible even when the need for it is recognized, or both of these operating simultaneously to maintain the pattern against all evidence that change would benefit everyone involved, including Homer himself. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This constant presence of alcohol in Homer's life creates the foundation for understanding how he uses drinking as a tool for emotional management and psychological survival. Drinking and emotional regulation. While Homer's constant drinking is established as a narrative fact from the earliest episodes, the show also provides significant insight into why Homer drinks and what psychological function the alcohol serves beyond simple physical enjoyment of the taste. A psychologist observing Homer across the full series would note that his drinking appears to serve a specific and consistent emotional function. Homer uses alcohol to manage feelings that he does not know how to process through healthier means. When he is stressed, he drinks. When he is sad, he drinks. When he is bored, he drinks. When he is frustrated with his job, his marriage, his children, or himself, he drinks. The drinking is not random or purposeless. It serves a clear psychological role as Homer's primary emotional regulation system. The clearest expression of this pattern is Homer's relationship with Moe's Tavern. The bar is not just a place where Homer goes to consume alcohol. It functions as his emotional processing center. When Homer has a fight with Marge, his immediate instinct is to go to Moe's. When he has a bad day at the power plant, he goes to Moe's. When something embarrassing happens to him, when he fails at something, when he feels inadequate or overwhelmed by the demands of his life, he goes to Moe's. The bar is where Homer goes to feel better, to escape from whatever is bothering him, to find temporary relief from the emotional discomfort of his daily existence. A psychologist would recognize this pattern as what clinicians call negative reinforcement drinking. This means that Homer drinks not primarily to create positive feelings, although that may happen as a side effect, but to remove negative feelings that he finds intolerable or that he lacks the skills to manage in any other way. The alcohol takes away the stress, the sadness, the frustration, and the boredom. It removes the unpleasant emotional states that Homer experiences regularly, but does not know how to address through conversation, through self-reflection, through exercise, through creative expression, or through any of the dozens of healthier coping mechanisms that psychologists recommend for emotional management. Homer has essentially outsourced his emotional regulation to a chemical substance, and that substance has become so embedded in his coping system that he cannot imagine managing his emotions without it. The episode Secrets of a Successful Marriage from Season 5 reveals just how dependent Homer is on external support systems for his emotional functioning. When Marge kicks Homer out of the house for publicly sharing her personal secrets with his adult education class, Homer spirals into dysfunction with alarming speed. Living in the treehouse in the backyard, separated from Marge and the comforts of home, Homer becomes filthy, hungry, and psychologically unstable within a single day. He begins talking to a plant he has dressed up to look like Marge. His clothes become torn and dirty. He deteriorates so rapidly that it becomes clear he cannot maintain basic functioning without the structure that Marge and the home environment provide. When Homer finally makes his case to Marge for why she should take him back, his argument is remarkable in its honesty. He tells her that the only thing he can offer her is complete and total dependence. He explains that they have been separated for only a day and he is already filthy, hungry, and going insane, and that more than anything, he cannot afford to ever lose her because he clearly cannot survive by himself. A psychologist would observe that Homer is describing a level of emotional and practical dependency that goes far beyond normal attachment to a spouse. He is acknowledging that he lacks the internal resources to regulate his own emotional state, to take care of his own basic needs, and to maintain psychological stability without external support. And alcohol is one of the primary external supports he relies on. Moe's Tavern and Marge serve overlapping but distinct functions in Homer's emotional economy. Marge provides stability, structure, and care. The bar provides escape, numbing, and relief from whatever feelings Marge's stability cannot address. The episode, What Animated Women Want, from season 24, shows this pattern playing out in Homer's marriage in a way that reveals its consequences. When Homer and Marge have a lunch date at a restaurant, Marge is excited to finally have an adult conversation without the children present. But Homer cannot engage emotionally. He sits across from his wife at a nice restaurant and focuses entirely on the food. Unable or unwilling to participate in the kind of genuine emotional exchange that Marge is looking for, she storms out, frustrated and disappointed. Homer's response to this marital crisis is not to reflect on why he struggles with emotional presence or to try to develop the skills Marge needs from him. His response is to go to Moe's Tavern and talk to Moe about his problems. He processes his marriage difficulties at the bar rather than at home with his wife. A psychologist would note the painful irony in this pattern. Homer goes to the place where emotional avoidance is the norm, the bar, to try to figure out how to be more emotionally present in the place where emotional presence is desperately needed, his marriage. The bar cannot teach him what Marge needs. Alcohol cannot develop the skills she is asking for. But it is the only processing system Homer knows how to use. The episode Moe Letter Blues from season 21 provides an outside perspective on this pattern through the eyes of Moe himself. In this episode, Moe, who spends his professional life watching Homer and the other barflies from behind the counter, observes that his role as bartender gives him unique insight into the marriages and emotional lives of his customers. He notices tension in the marriages of Homer, Apu, and Reverend Lovejoy precisely because these men reveal their emotional struggles while drinking at his bar, rather than addressing them directly with their wives at home. The bar is where the truth comes out, but it comes out in a context where it cannot lead to productive change. Homer tells Moe things he never tells Marge. He processes feelings at the bar that he cannot access at the kitchen table. The alcohol creates a space where emotional expression feels safe because there are no real consequences and no one will demand that the feelings lead to actual behavioral change. A psychologist would observe that this is precisely why alcohol is such a seductive but ultimately destructive coping mechanism. It creates the illusion of emotional processing without any of the actual work. Homer feels like he is dealing with his problems when he talks to Moe over a beer, but he is not dealing with them at all. He is temporarily relieving the pressure they create while leaving the underlying issues completely unresolved, ready to generate the same emotional distress again tomorrow, which will send him back to Moe's again tomorrow, in an endless cycle that never actually addresses anything. The episode that most explicitly connects Homer's drinking to broader emotional dysfunction also comes from a revealing marital context. In the episode where Homer fears his marriage might be following the path of Kirk and Luan Van Houten's collapsed marriage, Homer's anxiety about losing Marge does not lead him to examine his own behavior or to make the kind of sustained changes that might strengthen his marriage. Instead, he panics, files for divorce himself as a preemptive measure, and then orchestrates a surprise remarriage ceremony. Throughout this emotional crisis, throughout the fear of losing the most important relationship in his life, Homer's drinking continues uninterrupted. He does not connect his own drinking to the marital instability he fears. He does not recognize that his emotional unavailability, his nights at Moe's, his inability to be present with Marge in the ways she needs, all of these patterns are shaped and sustained by his constant alcohol consumption. A psychologist would observe that Homer's inability to see the connection between his drinking and his relationship problems is characteristic of how alcohol dependency functions as a self-reinforcing system. The drinking creates distance in the marriage. The distance creates anxiety. The anxiety drives more drinking, and the cycle continues without Homer ever identifying alcohol as the engine driving the entire pattern. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. These patterns of emotional coping through alcohol connect directly to how Homer's drinking affects his most important relationship, his marriage to Marge, in ways that have shaped both of their lives for decades. Alcoholism and the marriage. A psychologist observing the marriage of Homer and Marge Simpson across 35 seasons would note that Homer's chronic alcoholism has fundamentally shaped the dynamics of their relationship in ways that both partners have adapted to rather than challenged. Marge's experience of marriage has been permanently colored by Homer's drinking, and Homer's experience of marriage has been permanently mediated through alcohol. Neither of them has ever known what their marriage would look like without alcohol's constant presence, because sobriety has never lasted long enough to find out. The episode Mr. Lisa's Opus from season 29 provides one of the most direct windows into how Homer's drinking affects the marriage and how the family responds. In a future timeline sequence, Marge becomes visibly irritated with Homer for drinking beer in front of the children at the dinner table. She tells him to go to Moe's Tavern to drink instead, essentially exiling him from the family space so that his drinking does not have to be witnessed by his kids. After Homer leaves, Marge goes into the kitchen to cry. She's not crying about anything dramatic or catastrophic. She is crying about the quiet, persistent disappointment of being married to someone who cannot sit through a family dinner without a beer, who cannot be fully present at his own table, whose drinking is so embedded in his behavior that the only solution Marge can think of is to send him somewhere else to do it rather than asking him to stop. It takes Lisa, their daughter, a child, to intervene. Lisa goes to Moe's and tells Homer that Marge is going to leave him if he does not stop drinking. Homer promises to quit. He calls a sponsor to help him, and the sponsor turns out to be Ned Flanders, the family's neighbor. Homer succeeds in getting sober, and the marriage is saved. A psychologist would observe several important things about this sequence. First, it takes a child's intervention, not Homer's own insight or motivation, to create change. Homer does not recognize the severity of the situation until Lisa tells him directly that he is about to lose his wife. Second, the sobriety is framed as something Homer does for others rather than for himself. He stops drinking to save his marriage and to keep Lisa from losing her family, not because he has recognized that alcohol is harming his own life and his own functioning. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the success of this sobriety attempt within a single episode demonstrates that Homer is capable of stopping. The drinking is not beyond his control in some absolute sense. When the stakes are made clear enough and when adequate support is provided, he can choose not to drink. The fact that this capability exists but remains largely unused across the rest of the series suggests that the problem is not inability, but insufficient motivation combined with an environment that does not sustain adequate pressure for change. The broader pattern of Marge's behavior across the series reveals what psychologists would identify as classic enabling behavior. Marge is not unaware of Homer's drinking. She has confronted him about it on multiple occasions. She has expressed frustration, disappointment, and genuine distress about what his drinking does to their family. But she ultimately accommodates the drinking rather than consistently challenging it. She tolerates his late nights at Moe's. She manages the household and the children largely on her own during the hours Homer spends at the bar. She makes excuses for his behavior to others when his drinking causes public embarrassment. She has developed a relationship with Moe's Tavern herself, knowing that it is where Homer goes when things are difficult, and accepting that this is simply how her husband manages his emotions. A psychologist would note that enabling is not a character flaw in Marge. It is an adaptive strategy that develops naturally in the partners of people with chronic alcohol dependency. When you have lived with someone's drinking for decades, when confrontation has not produced lasting change, when the consequences of pushing too hard might include conflict that disrupts the family further, accommodation becomes the path of least resistance. Marge has learned that fighting Homer's drinking is exhausting and largely futile, so she has structured her expectations and her household around it instead. The episode Waiting for Duffman from season 26 provides a window into what Marge hopes for and what Homer's drinking has taken from their marriage. When Homer wins a competition to become the new Duffman, the temporary mascot for Duff Beer, he is told that he must remain completely sober while on the job. A chip has supposedly been implanted in him that will detect if he drinks. Marge's reaction to this news is revealing. She is visibly thrilled. She does not try to hide her excitement about the prospect of a sober Homer. Her enthusiasm is so strong that it drowns out Homer's own despair about not being able to drink. A psychologist would observe that Marge's reaction reveals how much she wants a sober husband, how much she has been quietly hoping for something that might create the change she cannot produce through her own efforts. The forced sobriety represents an external intervention that removes the burden of confrontation from Marge's shoulders and places it on an employer's rules instead. She does not have to be the one demanding he stop drinking. The job demands it for her. During Homer's period of forced sobriety as Duffman, he begins to see the world differently. He notices the damage that Duff Beer is causing throughout Springfield. He sees the littering, the car crashes, the way alcohol degrades the lives and environments of the people who consume it. For the first time, he can see what his drinking has been doing because he is looking at it from the outside, sober, rather than from the inside, intoxicated. He even attempts to hand out alcohol-free beer at a motor racing event, trying to convince the audience that they can have a good time without real beer. The crowd responds with anger, forming a mob. When Homer is eventually told that there was no chip and he is free to drink again, he returns to heavy drinking immediately and is fired from the Duffman role. The insight he gained through sobriety evaporates the moment the external constraint is removed. A psychologist would find this pattern deeply revealing about the nature of Homer's dependency. Insight alone is not sufficient to produce change. Homer saw clearly what alcohol does to people. He experienced the benefits of sobriety firsthand. He tried to share that perspective with others, and none of it was enough to override the pull of the addiction once the external barrier to drinking was removed. This demonstrates that Homer's alcoholism is not primarily a problem of knowledge or awareness. It is a problem of dependency that persists even when the person knows better. The accumulated impact of Homer's drinking on the marriage across 35 seasons represents a quiet tragedy that the show rarely addresses directly because the show's episodic structure resets consequences each week. But a psychologist would note that in reality, the kind of chronic emotional unavailability, the repeated nights at the bar instead of home, the inability to be fully present during family moments, the impaired judgment that leads to poor decisions affecting the entire household. All of these consequences accumulate over years in ways that fundamentally alter the character of a marriage. Marge has never experienced a sustained period of marriage to a fully sober Homer. She does not know who that Homer would be. She does not know what their conversations would sound like if alcohol were not always present in the background, dulling his engagement and limiting his emotional range. She is adapted to the version of Homer she has, the drinking version, because that is the only version she has ever been given for more than a few weeks at a time. and she has built a life around that adaptation, a life that works well enough but that is permanently diminished by the presence of a substance that her husband cannot seem to live without. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The impact of Homer's drinking on his marriage connects directly to how his alcoholism shapes perhaps the most consequential relationship of all: his role as a father to Bart, Lisa, and Maggie. Alcoholism and fatherhood. A psychologist observing Homer's parenting across the full run of The Simpsons would note that his chronic alcoholism does not just coexist with his fatherhood. It actively shapes the kind of father he is, the kind of father he is not, and the lasting impact his parenting has on his children's psychological development. Homer is not absent in the traditional sense. He lives in the home. He shows up for family events. He expresses love for his children in his own clumsy and imperfect way. But he is functionally absent in ways that matter enormously for child development, because the drinking ensures that he is rarely fully present, rarely fully engaged, and rarely operating with the unimpaired judgment that parenting consistently requires. The episode Duffless from Season 4 demonstrates what Homer's children might have if their father were sober. During his 30 days without alcohol, Homer's belly shrinks, his energy improves, and his overall functioning in the household noticeably improves. He saves money that would have been spent on beer. He is more present, more available, and more capable. The show does not spell out specific parenting improvements in elaborate detail, but the implication is clear. When Homer is not drinking, there is more of him available for his family, more attention, more resources, more presence, more of the things that children need from a parent. A psychologist would note that this brief window of sobriety reveals the gap between the father Homer is and the father Homer could be. And that gap is created almost entirely by alcohol. In a much later episode from season 33, this point is made even more explicitly. When Homer is chemically prevented from drinking through an anti-booze injection, the transformation is dramatic and immediate. He becomes what the show describes as a much more mature father. He loses weight, he gets a promotion at work, and most significantly for his children, he follows through on promises he has made to them. He actually does the things he said he would do. A psychologist would pause on this detail because it reveals something that Homer's children have been living with their entire lives. Their father makes promises and does not keep them. He says he will do things and then does not do them. And the reason he does not follow through is directly connected to his drinking. The alcohol impairs his motivation, his memory, his energy, and his prioritization in ways that cause him to default on the commitments he makes to his kids over and over again. When the drinking is removed, the promises get kept. The implication is devastating in its simplicity. Homer's children have been raised by a diminished version of their father, and the thing diminishing him has been in his hand the entire time. The episode Days of Wine and Doses from season 11 provides a moment that captures the contradictory nature of Homer's relationship with fatherhood and alcohol in a single sequence. When Barney Gumble gets sober and begins taking helicopter flying lessons, a forest fire breaks out on Mount Springfield and Bart and Lisa are trapped on the mountain. Barney and Homer fly the helicopter to rescue the children, but during the mission, a Duff beer truck spills its cargo onto a bridge where they have landed. Barney, newly sober and fragile in his recovery, reaches for a six-pack. Homer stops him. He grabs the beer himself and drinks all 6 cans, preventing Barney from relapsing. He then drunkenly reaches down from the helicopter and pulls his children to safety, nearly crashing the helicopter in the process due to the sudden weight shift. A psychologist would observe the layered and disturbing irony of this scene. Homer's heroic moment as a father, the dramatic rescue of his children from a burning mountain, happens while he is intoxicated. He saved Barney's sobriety by sacrificing his own, drinking the beer that Barney was about to consume. And the rescue itself is made more dangerous, not less, by Homer's impaired state. Yet the narrative frames this as a triumph. Homer saved the day. Homer was a good father in that moment. and the drinking was part of the story rather than an obstacle to it. A psychologist would note that this is precisely how families with an alcoholic member often process the drinking. The heroic moments get remembered, the dysfunction gets normalized, and nobody asks whether the rescue might have been easier, safer, and less traumatic for the children if the rescuer had been sober. The impact on Homer's children can be observed through how each child has adapted to life with an alcoholic father. Lisa has become the family's moral compass and emotional adult, assuming responsibilities for insight, conscience, and emotional processing that her father should be providing. She worries about things that children should not have to worry about. She intervenes in adult problems like her father's drinking because the actual adults in the situation are not handling it. In the episode from season 29, it is Lisa who goes to Moe's tavern to tell Homer that Marge is going to leave him. A child is performing the function that a therapist, a counselor, a doctor, or Homer's own self-awareness should be performing. A psychologist would recognize this as parentification, a well-documented pattern in families with alcoholism where children take on adult emotional roles because the alcoholic parent is unable to fulfill those roles themselves. Bart, meanwhile, has adapted through a different pathway. His behavioral problems, his defiance of authority, his constant need for attention and stimulation can all be understood at least partially as the response of a child who does not receive consistent, engaged fathering from his primary male role model. Homer's evenings at Moe's, his emotional unavailability when he is home but drinking, his inability to follow through on commitments, all of these create a parenting vacuum that Bart fills with misbehavior because negative attention is still attention. And attention from a frequently absent or impaired father is scarce enough to be worth seeking through any means available. The show captures the community's perception of Homer's drinking and its impact on his parenting through a revealing exchange in the episode where Homer's Big Brother organization partner Tom meets Bart. Bart has told Tom exaggerated but not entirely inaccurate stories about his home life. And when Tom encounters Homer, he asks with barely restrained anger, "His father, the drunken gambler?" Homer's response is immediate, cheerful, and completely lacking in self-awareness. He instinctively and happily replies, "That's right, and who might you be?" He does not hear the accusation in the question. He does not recognize that being identified as a drunken gambler should concern him as a father. He hears a description that he considers accurate and confirms it without any sense that it should be alarming that this is how his own son's community perceives him. A psychologist would note that Homer's complete lack of defensiveness about being called a drunken father is itself a sign of how thoroughly his denial system operates. He has normalized his drinking to such an extent that being publicly identified as an alcoholic parent does not register as shameful or concerning. It is simply who he is, in the same way that his name is Homer, and he works at the power plant. Maggie, the youngest, exists in a different position within this family dynamic. She is largely silent throughout the series, and her experience of Homer's alcoholism is the least explored. But a psychologist would observe that Maggie is growing up in a household where her father's drinking is the background condition of her entire childhood. She has never known anything else. The normalization that Bart and Lisa have developed over years of adaptation is Maggie's starting condition. She has no memories of a sober father to compare against. The drinking is simply what fathers do, as far as her earliest and most formative experiences are concerned. A psychologist examining the accumulated impact of Homer's alcoholism on his children across 3 decades of storytelling would note something that the show itself rarely addresses directly. These children are being shaped by their father's drinking in ways that will affect their own adult relationships, their own coping strategies, their own expectations about what partnerships look like and what fathers are supposed to provide. Lisa's hyper-responsibility, Bart's acting out, Maggie's quiet adaptation, these are not just character traits. They are the psychological fingerprints of growing up with an alcoholic parent who is present enough to love, but too impaired to consistently deliver on what that love should provide. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Homer's drinking does not just shape his family relationships, it also shapes the social environment he inhabits, particularly the bar that functions as his second home and the friendships that exist almost exclusively within its walls. Moe's Tavern as psychological architecture. A psychologist observing Homer's life would pay close attention to the role that Moe's Tavern plays in sustaining his alcoholism, because the environment a person drinks in is often just as important as the substance itself in maintaining addictive behavior. Moe's Tavern is not simply a building where alcohol is served. It is a psychological structure that provides Homer with things he genuinely needs: companionship, predictability, emotional expression, acceptance, while simultaneously ensuring that he continues drinking in order to access those things. The bar meets real psychological needs through an addictive mechanism, which is precisely why Homer returns to it day after day, year after year, decade after decade. The episode Homer the Moe from season 13 reveals how central the bar environment is to Homer's functioning. When Moe visits his old bartending school for inspiration and returns to transform his tavern into a trendy, exclusive nightclub called M, Homer and his fellow barflies are devastated. The place they depended on has been taken from them. The familiar stools, the familiar drinks, the familiar dynamic between bartender and customer, all of it has been replaced by something sleek and unwelcoming that does not serve their needs. Homer's response is immediate and telling. He opens his own bar in the family garage. He cannot tolerate the loss of the drinking environment, so he recreates it in his own home. He does not use the closure of Moe's as an opportunity to spend evenings with his family instead. He does not take up a hobby, visit friends in non-drinking contexts, or explore any alternative use of his free time. He builds a new bar. A psychologist would observe that this response reveals how deeply Homer's social life and emotional functioning are dependent on the bar setting. Remove the bar, and Homer does not transition to other activities or relationships. He builds a replacement bar because the drinking environment is the only social and emotional framework he knows how to operate within. The episode Flaming Moe's from season 3 shows another dimension of Homer's relationship with Moe's and with alcohol culture more broadly. In this episode, Homer invents a cocktail recipe by accident. He discovers that combining remnants from various nearly empty liquor bottles with crusty brand cough syrup and setting the mixture on fire creates a drink with remarkable flavor. He shares this recipe with Moe, who steals it, renames it the Flaming Moe, and uses it to turn his failing bar into the hottest night spot in Springfield. The drink becomes so popular that even the rock band Aerosmith becomes a regular fixture at the bar. A psychologist would note the significance of Homer's one genuine moment of creative innovation. His greatest invention, the thing he contributed to the world through his own accidental creativity, is an alcoholic beverage, not a safety improvement at the power plant, not a device that helps his family, not a contribution to his community, an alcoholic drink. Homer's creativity, when it does emerge, expresses itself through the lens of his addiction. His imagination is captured by alcohol in the same way his evenings and his emotional life are captured by it. The episode Mommy Beerest from season 16 shows the most extreme expression of Homer's attachment to the bar when he takes out a second mortgage on the family home to fund Moe's Tavern reopening after it fails a health inspection. The financial risk this creates for his wife and children is substantial. A second mortgage means increased monthly payments, reduced equity in their home, and greater vulnerability if anything goes wrong financially. Homer makes this decision without a parent agonizing over the competing interests at stake, without weighing his family's financial security against his desire to have Moe's Tavern operational again. A psychologist would observe that this decision demonstrates how Homer's psychological attachment to the bar has reached a level where it overrides normal protective instincts about family welfare. The bar's survival feels necessary to Homer in a way that transcends rational cost-benefit analysis. The social dynamics within Moe's tavern also play a crucial role in sustaining Homer's drinking. His primary friendships are with Lenny Leonard, Carl Carlson, and Barney Gumble, and these friendships exist almost exclusively within the context of the bar. They drink together, they talk at the bar, they share problems over beers. The friendships are genuine in the sense that these men care about each other and enjoy each other's company. But they are also structurally dependent on the drinking environment. Remove the bar, and it is unclear whether these friendships would survive in their current form because the men have never developed alternative contexts for spending time together. A psychologist would note that this pattern is common in people with alcohol dependency. Their social network consists primarily or entirely of other drinkers, and the shared drinking activity is the glue that holds the relationships together. This creates a situation where maintaining friendships requires maintaining the drinking, because the friendships have no foundation outside the bar. The bartender Moe himself plays a specific enabling role in Homer's addiction. Moe never cuts Homer off. Moe never suggests that Homer has had enough. Moe never recommends that Homer might benefit from drinking less or from seeking help for his alcohol consumption. Moe's economic livelihood depends on Homer's continued drinking, which creates a structural conflict of interest between Moe's financial needs and Homer's health needs. Even when Moe can see that Homer is struggling, even when the drinking is creating visible problems in Homer's life, Moe continues serving him because that is what bartenders do, and because Homer's money keeps the bar open. A psychologist would observe that Moe functions as an unwitting enabler whose economic incentives are perfectly aligned with Homer's addiction and perfectly opposed to Homer's recovery. The collective effect of these dynamics is that Moe's tavern creates a self-contained ecosystem that sustains Homer's drinking from multiple directions simultaneously. The bar provides social connection that Homer craves. The barflies provide companionship without challenge. The bartender provides alcohol without limits. The routine provides predictability and comfort. And the entire system operates without anyone ever suggesting that the drinking itself might be the source of the problems that drive Homer to the bar in the first place. The bar is Homer's world within the world, and it is a world that is specifically and structurally designed to keep him drinking. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This understanding of the bar as an enabling environment connects to one of the most psychologically revealing relationships in the entire series, the relationship between Homer and Barney Gumble, which serves as a mirror that Homer refuses to look into. The Barney mirror, what Homer refuses to see. A psychologist observing the dynamic between Homer and Barney Gumble would recognize a pattern that is extremely common in people with alcohol dependency. Homer uses Barney as a reference point that allows him to deny the severity of his own drinking. No matter how much Homer drinks, Barney drinks more. No matter how dysfunctional Homer becomes under the influence of alcohol, Barney is worse. No matter how many consequences Homer's drinking creates, Barney's consequences are more dramatic, more visible, and more severe. This downward comparison gives Homer psychological permission to believe that his own drinking is moderate, manageable, and fundamentally different from real alcoholism because real alcoholism looks like Barney and Homer does not look like Barney. Barney Gumble is presented throughout the series as the town drunk of Springfield. He stumbles, he slurs, he passes out in public, he burps constantly, and he has lost jobs, relationships, and opportunities because of his drinking. His alcoholism is visible, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. Everyone in Springfield knows Barney is an alcoholic. It is his defining characteristic in the community's eyes. And Homer sits next to Barney at the bar every night, drinking the same beer from the same establishment and sees no connection between Barney's condition and his own. A psychologist would note that this is a textbook example of how denial operates through comparison. As long as there is someone who appears to be worse off, the person can maintain the belief that they do not have a real problem. Homer is not falling down in the street like Barney. Homer still has his job, his wife, his home. Therefore, in Homer's mind, Homer is not an alcoholic. He is just a guy who enjoys a beer after work. The episode Days of Wine and Dionysus from season 11 provides the most psychologically significant exploration of the Homer and Barney dynamic. In this episode, after Barney sees a video of his own shameful behavior at a birthday party, behavior he cannot remember because he was blackout drunk during the event, Barney makes a decision to get sober. He attends Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. He struggles through the initial difficulty of withdrawal and adjustment. And he succeeds. He gets clean and sober. He begins taking helicopter flying lessons, a hobby that demonstrates the kind of focused, competent, forward-looking behavior that was impossible for him while drinking. A psychologist would note that Barney's sobriety journey demonstrates that recovery is possible even for someone whose alcoholism was as severe and as publicly visible as Barney's. If Barney can get sober, then the severity of addiction is not a barrier to recovery. Willingness and effort are the relevant factors. What is psychologically significant is Homer's reaction to Barney's sobriety. Homer is not inspired by it. He is not motivated to examine his own drinking in light of Barney's success. He is unsettled by it. Barney's sobriety removes the reference point that Homer relied on to deny his own problem. If Barney is sober and Homer is still drinking, then Homer can no longer point to Barney and say, "That is what an alcoholic looks like, and I do not look like that." The mirror has been cleaned, and Homer does not like what it reflects. During the helicopter rescue sequence, when Barney is about to relapse by reaching for a spilled beer, Homer grabs the beer and drinks it himself. On the surface, this appears to be a selfless act. Homer is protecting Barney's sobriety by consuming the temptation himself, but a psychologist would observe a more complicated dynamic operating beneath the surface. Homer is also re-establishing the status quo that his denial depends on. By drinking the beer himself, he is reasserting himself as the drinking friend and preventing a dynamic where both of them are sober, which would force Homer to confront his own relationship with alcohol without Barney's worst behavior as a shield. At the end of that episode, Barney is still sober but has developed a new dependency on double tall mocha lattes. Nearby, Mo stands triumphantly beside his new coffee cart. A psychologist would observe that even the show's treatment of Barney's sobriety comes with a punchline that subtly undermines the seriousness of recovery by suggesting that one addiction is simply replaced by another. The show's comedic framework prevents it from fully honoring the difficulty and significance of what Barney achieved, which parallels how Homer's social environment prevents him from fully honoring the implications of Barney's transformation for his own life. Barney's film Pocahontas, shown during the Springfield Film Festival in an earlier episode, represents an even more pointed mirror for Homer. Barney creates an artistic, introspective documentary about his own alcoholism that moves the festival audience to tears. The film is deeply personal, emotionally honest, and clearly the work of someone who has looked at his own drinking with unflinching clarity. The audience responds with genuine emotion. The other judges, including Jay Sherman, recognize it as the obvious winner. Homer, serving as a judge, is the one voice who votes against Barney's film in favor of a video of Hans Moleman getting hit in the groin with a football. A psychologist would observe that Homer's refusal to vote for Barney's film about alcoholism, choosing instead the most superficial and mindless alternative available, can be read as an unconscious act of self-protection. Honoring Barney's honest exploration of alcoholism would require Homer to acknowledge that alcoholism is a real and serious condition that affects people he knows, people he sits next to every night at the bar. It is easier and psychologically safer to vote for the football to the groin. The Homer and Barney relationship reveals a fundamental truth about how denial operates in the context of addiction. Homer does not deny that alcoholism exists. He can see it clearly in Barney. He does not deny that alcohol causes problems. He can see Barney's problems with perfect clarity. What Homer denies is that any of this applies to him personally. He has drawn an invisible line between Barney's drinking and his own, a line that exists only in his mind and that allows him to consume the same substance in the same establishment every single night without ever classifying his own behavior as problematic. A psychologist would recognize this as the most common and the most durable form of addiction denial, the kind that does not require the person to be ignorant about addiction in general, but only to maintain a specific blindness about their own particular case. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. These patterns of denial, enabled by downward comparison, connect directly to the cognitive and behavioral effects that chronic drinking has on Homer's day-to-day functioning, his judgment, and his decision-making. Cognitive and behavioral effects of chronic drinking. A psychologist observing Homer across the full run of the series would note that his chronic alcohol use produces visible effects on his cognitive functioning that are present in virtually every episode, even when the drinking itself is not the focus of the plot. Homer's judgment is consistently impaired. His impulse control is limited. His ability to plan ahead, anticipate consequences, and make rational decisions about risk and reward is compromised in ways that affect his work, his family, and his safety on a daily basis. These cognitive effects are so pervasive and so consistent that they have become part of who Homer is in the minds of both the audience and the other characters in the show. People expect Homer to make bad decisions. People expect Homer to fail to think things through. People expect Homer to act on impulse without considering what will happen next. And while the show attributes some of this to Homer's general intelligence level, a psychologist would observe that chronic heavy alcohol consumption would produce exactly these cognitive patterns even in someone who started with higher baseline intelligence. Because alcohol specifically targets the brain regions responsible for executive function, judgment, impulse control, and consequence evaluation. The episode Duffless from season 4 provides a revealing demonstration of how Homer's tolerance has developed through years of chronic drinking. When Homer is pulled over by police after visiting the Duff Brewery, he passes the physical sobriety test with flying colors. He touches his nose with his fingers alternately while balancing on one foot. He recites the alphabet without error. His motor coordination and his memory for simple tasks appear unimpaired. He looks and acts sober enough to pass every external measure of intoxication that the officers apply. It is only when the breathalyzer is used that the truth emerges. His blood alcohol level is high enough to warrant arrest despite his completely normal appearing behavior. A psychologist would note that this discrepancy between Homer's apparent functioning and his actual intoxication level is a hallmark of high-tolerance alcoholism. His body has adapted to the constant presence of alcohol to such an extent that he can perform routine physical and cognitive tasks while significantly intoxicated. This adaptation does not mean the alcohol is not affecting him. It means the effects have become his normal baseline, invisible to outside observers and to Homer himself because he has never experienced extended sobriety that would provide a comparison point. The episode Homer versus the 18th Amendment from season 8 contains a line from Marge that captures an important truth about Homer's cognitive functioning in relation to his drinking. When Marge discovers that Homer has been running a bootlegging operation during Prohibition, her reaction is not anger or disappointment. Her reaction is surprise and admiration. She tells him that this is the most brilliant thing he has ever done over his years of stupidity. She is amazed at how much money he has made and how cleverly the operation was designed. A psychologist would pause in this exchange because it reveals something psychologically significant about where Homer's intelligence is deployed. His most elaborate, most creative, most sustained demonstration of planning and ingenuity across the entire series is directed at maintaining access to alcohol. He designed a system of underground pipes connecting a bowling alley to a bar. He orchestrated timing, logistics, and money flows. He evaded law enforcement. He sustained the operation over weeks. And all of this remarkable cognitive effort was applied to the single goal of ensuring that beer continued flowing. not to improving his family's finances, not to advancing his career, not to creating something for his children, but to preserving his access to the substance he depends on. A psychologist would observe that this pattern is characteristic of how addiction channels cognitive resources. The brain's planning and problem-solving capabilities become preferentially allocated to substance-related goals, while non-substance goals receive diminished effort and attention. The episode Trilogy of Error from Season 12 contains a small but psychologically revealing moment that demonstrates how Homer's alcohol-related cognitive patterns have become automatic and reflexive. Lisa has built a grammar-correcting robot called Linguo for the school science fair. When Homer says, "Me love beer," Linguo corrects it to "I love beer." Homer's response is not to appreciate the grammatical correction or to engage with Lisa's impressive creation on its own terms. Instead, he interprets Linguo's correction as the robot expressing a desire to drink beer, and he immediately grabs a can of Duff and pours it into the robot's mouth, causing it to malfunction. A psychologist would observe that Homer's interpretation of Linguo's output reveals how deeply alcohol has colonized his cognitive framework. When he hears the phrase, "I love beer," his brain processes it not as a grammatical correction, but as a statement of desire for beer, because desiring beer is the lens through which Homer processes nearly everything. He then acts on this interpretation by pouring beer into the robot, destroying Lisa's science fair project in the process. His alcohol-saturated cognitive patterns have become so automatic that they override his ability to understand a simple interaction with his daughter's creation. Homer's job performance at the Springfield nuclear power plant provides ongoing evidence of how chronic drinking affects his cognitive functioning in a professional context. He sleeps at his workstation. He makes dangerous errors that should, in any realistic workplace, have resulted in catastrophic nuclear accidents. He cannot maintain sustained attention to his duties. He forgets procedures. He takes actions without considering their consequences for the safety of the plant or the community. Mr. Burns keeps him employed despite this comprehensive incompetence, which removes the professional consequences that might otherwise create pressure for Homer to address his drinking. A psychologist would note that Homer's workplace is yet another enabling environment. His employer does not hold him accountable for his impaired performance, which means Homer never has to confront the possibility that his drinking is affecting his ability to do his job safely. The consequences that would normally attach to this level of professional dysfunction are absent, allowing the dysfunction to continue without interruption. A psychologist would also observe that Homer's impaired cognitive functioning while drinking extends to his ability to assess risk accurately. He repeatedly puts himself and his family in dangerous situations without adequate consideration of what might go wrong. He makes impulsive decisions about investments, about schemes, about adventures, about confrontations, without the kind of careful weighing of potential outcomes that a sober mind would naturally perform. This is not entirely due to alcohol. Homer is presented as someone with limited foresight even in his best moments. But a psychologist would note that chronic alcohol use specifically targets the prefrontal cortex, which is the brain region responsible for exactly the kind of planning, consequence evaluation, and impulse inhibition that Homer consistently fails to demonstrate. Whatever Homer's baseline cognitive capabilities might be, they are being further degraded by decades of daily heavy drinking in ways that are visible in virtually every decision he makes. The cognitive effects of Homer's chronic drinking also manifest in his memory and his ability to learn from experience. Across 35 seasons, Homer makes the same types of mistakes repeatedly without apparent learning. He trusts people he should not trust. He falls for schemes that a more reflective person would see through. He repeats behaviors that have produced negative outcomes in the past without recognizing the pattern. A psychologist would observe that chronic alcohol use impairs the brain's ability to consolidate experiences into useful long-term memories and to retrieve those memories accurately when similar situations arise in the future. Homer's inability to learn from his mistakes may not be entirely explained by his drinking, but his drinking certainly contributes to it by impairing the memory systems and the reflective capacities that learning from experience requires. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. These cognitive effects of chronic drinking create the backdrop for understanding perhaps the most insidious aspect of Homer's alcoholism, the way Springfield as a community has normalized his drinking to the point where it has become invisible as a problem. The normalization problem. A psychologist observing Homer's alcoholism would pay particular attention to the environment in which that alcoholism exists because addiction does not occur in a vacuum. It occurs within social, cultural, and economic systems that either challenge the addiction or accommodate it. And Springfield accommodates Homer's drinking with a thoroughness that borders on the systematic. Every institution Homer interacts with, his workplace, his community, his social circle, his family, and even his healthcare system, has adapted to his alcoholism rather than confronting it, creating an environment where heavy daily drinking is treated as normal, acceptable, and fundamentally unremarkable. Springfield itself is a town where alcohol is deeply embedded in the civic culture. Duff Beer sponsors virtually everything. The Duff blimp hovers over sporting events. Duff advertisements are everywhere. The town's saint, Patrick's Day celebration centers entirely on public drinking, to such an extent that a Duff float spraying free beer into the crowd is considered a normal part of the festivities. When that same festival results in Bart accidentally getting drunk from beer that sprayed into his plastic novelty horn, the town's response is not to question why a parade float was spraying beer into a crowd that included children. The town's response is to enforce a prohibition law that had been on the books, but unenforced for 200 years, which is immediately resisted by virtually everyone and eventually overturned when the law is discovered to have been repealed 199 years earlier. The entire arc of that episode, from the crisis that triggers the ban to the relief when it ends, frames alcohol as something the community cannot live without, as a fundamental right and necessity rather than a substance that should be consumed responsibly or that creates problems worth addressing. A psychologist would note that Homer's individual alcoholism exists within this broader cultural normalization and is sustained by it. He is not drinking alone in a culture that disapproves of drinking. He is drinking constantly in a culture that celebrates drinking, that builds its economy around drinking, and that reacts to the restriction of drinking as if a basic freedom has been violated. Homer's healthcare system does not appear to consistently identify or address his drinking as a medical concern. Dr. Hibbert, the family's primary physician, does not regularly raise Homer's alcohol consumption as a health issue during appointments. Homer's obvious risk factors for alcohol-related health problems, including his weight, his diet, his chronic daily consumption of beer, his history of a DUI arrest, are not treated as triggers for sustained medical intervention or referral to addiction treatment services. A psychologist would observe that healthcare systems often fail to adequately screen for and address alcohol use disorders, particularly in patients who are high-functioning enough to maintain employment and family life. Homer falls into a category that healthcare providers frequently miss: the patient whose drinking is severe enough to cause significant harm over time, but not dramatic enough to trigger immediate crisis intervention. He is the patient who gets his blood pressure checked, but never gets asked how many drinks he has per day in a way that leads to meaningful follow-up. Homer's employer, Mr. Burns, provides another layer of normalization by failing to hold Homer accountable for job performance that is clearly affected by his drinking. Homer sleeps at his safety-critical workstation. He makes errors that in a real nuclear power plant would have catastrophic consequences. He comes to work in states that suggest he may still be under the influence of alcohol from the previous night's drinking. And yet he remains employed. He is never referred to an employee assistance program. He is never given a warning tied to alcohol-related performance issues. He is never drug tested or alcohol tested as a condition of continued employment in a safety-sensitive position. A psychologist would note that the absence of workplace consequences removes one of the most common pressure points for addressing alcohol dependency. Many people who eventually seek treatment do so because their employer has identified a problem and made continued employment contingent on getting help. Homer never faces this pressure because his employer either does not care about his performance or actively benefits from maintaining a workforce that is too dysfunctional to demand better treatment. The episode Waiting for Duffman from season 26 provides the most direct illustration of how sobriety creates a radically different perspective on alcohol's effects. When Homer is sober as the temporary Duffman, he can suddenly see the damage that Duff beer is causing throughout Springfield. He notices the littering, the accidents, the degradation of public spaces and public behavior. He sees what alcohol does to people and to the community when he is looking at it from outside the fog of his own daily consumption. He tries to share this perspective by distributing alcohol-free beer at a motor racing event, attempting to convince the audience that they can enjoy themselves without real beer. The crowd responds with rage, forming an angry mob. A psychologist would find this response deeply significant. When one person achieves sobriety and tries to share the clarity that sobriety provides, the drinking community responds not with curiosity or openness, but with hostility. The sober person's perspective is experienced as a threat rather than as useful information. Homer's brief attempt to share what sobriety showed him is met with violent rejection by the very community whose drinking he was trying to address. And when Homer is told that the sobriety chip was fake and he is free to drink again, he returns to heavy drinking immediately and is fired from the Duffman role. The community's normalization of alcohol wins. The brief window of clarity closes, and Homer returns to the fog that Springfield considers normal. No character in the show consistently and persistently confronts Homer about his alcoholism as a serious condition requiring professional treatment. Marge raises concerns periodically, but her objections are episodic rather than sustained, and they typically resolve within a single episode without producing lasting change. Lisa intervenes in specific moments of crisis, but does not maintain ongoing pressure for sobriety. Bart and Maggie do not challenge it at all. The barflies encourage it. Moe profits from it. Mr. Burns ignores it. Dr. Hibbert does not treat it. The community celebrates it. A psychologist would observe that Homer exists in what clinicians call an enabling system, where every person and institution in the addicted person's environment has adapted to accommodate the addiction rather than challenging it, creating conditions that make recovery extraordinarily difficult because there is no sustained external pressure to change and because every part of the environment is structured to support continued drinking. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This comprehensive normalization of Homer's drinking by his entire community creates the context for understanding what the show's occasional sobriety episodes reveal about the person Homer might become if the drinking were to stop. Sobriety episodes, what Homer could be. Among the most psychologically revealing moments in the entire run of The Simpsons are the episodes in which Homer is, for one reason or another, forced or persuaded to stop drinking. These episodes function as natural experiments, brief windows into an alternate version of Homer Simpson that exists as potential, but that his chronic alcoholism prevents from being realized. Each time Homer achieves sobriety, measurable improvements appear across multiple domains of his life. And each time he returns to drinking, those improvements vanish. The consistency of this pattern across different episodes and different seasons makes it one of the most significant pieces of psychological evidence in the show's treatment of Homer's character. The Duffless episode from season 4 provides the earliest and in some ways the most hopeful version of this pattern. After 30 days without beer, Homer has lost weight. He has saved over $100. He has shown improvements in his behavior and his engagement with his family. When he walks into Moe's at the end of the 30 days, money in hand, he looks at the barflies and sees for the first time what alcohol has done to them. He makes the conscious choice to leave, telling Moe to save his drink, and goes home to Marge. In that moment, Homer demonstrates something critically important. He is capable of seeing clearly. He is capable of recognizing what alcohol does to people. He is capable of choosing Marge over beer. He's capable of making the healthy choice when his mind is clear and his judgment is unimpaired. A psychologist would emphasize the significance of this moment because it demonstrates that Homer's addiction does not operate at the level of absolute inability. He can choose sobriety. The fact that he does not sustain that choice beyond a single episode suggests that the barriers to sustained recovery are environmental and psychological rather than absolute, which means they are at least theoretically addressable. The Waiting for Duffman episode from season 26 extends this observation into a more recent era of the show. When Homer is forced to stay sober as the Duffman mascot, his sobriety produces clarity about alcohol's effects on Springfield, empathy for the people affected by drinking culture, and the motivation to try to help others see what he can now see. He is not just passively better while sober, he is actively trying to make things better around him. He is taking the perspective that sobriety provides and attempting to translate it into action that benefits others. This suggests that sober Homer is not just a healthier version of Homer. He is a more engaged, more empathetic, and more constructive version of Homer. A psychologist would note that this level of positive change during sobriety is not unusual in people with alcohol dependency. The substance suppresses capacities for empathy, initiative, and constructive engagement that emerge naturally when the substance is removed. Homer's experience as sober. Duffman reveals that beneath the fog of daily drinking, there is a person who is capable of caring about the world around him in ways that his drinking self never demonstrates. The episode from season 33 involving the anti-booze injection provides the most dramatic demonstration of what sobriety could mean for Homer and his family. When Homer is chemically prevented from drinking by an injection that produces severe symptoms if he consumes alcohol, the transformation is comprehensive. He becomes a much more mature father who follows through on his promises to his children. He loses weight. He gets a promotion at work. The improvements are not subtle or ambiguous. They are dramatic and obvious and affect every major area of his life simultaneously. When it is over and Homer is offered the antidote that would allow him to drink again, his initial response is perhaps the most psychologically honest moment the show has ever given him. He refuses. He says that he never got to be the person he wanted to be, and that he wants to live a new life without alcohol. In that moment, Homer acknowledges something that his drinking self can never sustain awareness of. He knows that alcohol has prevented him from becoming who he wants to be. He knows that his life could be better, that he could be better without it. He knows that the drinking has been the barrier between his actual life and his desired life for all these years. But the show cannot allow Homer to stay sober because the show requires him to return to his familiar state for the next episode and the episode after that. The status quo must be restored, and so Homer is chased down and injected with the antidote against his expressed wishes, and he returns to drinking. A psychologist would note that this narrative choice, while necessary for the show's comedic structure, inadvertently mirrors one of the most heartbreaking aspects of real addiction. Many people in recovery have moments of clarity where they see clearly what their life could be without the substance. Many of them genuinely want the sober version of their life, and many of them return to drinking anyway, not because the clarity was false or the desire was insincere, but because the pull of addiction, the pressure of enabling environments, the weight of long-established habits, and the difficulty of sustained change combined to override even genuine motivation and genuine insight. Homer's return to drinking after expressing a clear desire to remain sober is tragic precisely because it is realistic. The person who wants to change and the person who continues drinking are the same person, and the drinking person keeps winning. The pattern across these sobriety episodes reveals something about Homer that the rest of the series obscures. Somewhere beneath the daily drinking, beneath the impaired judgment and the emotional avoidance and the nights at Moe's Tavern, there is a version of Homer who is a better father, a better husband, a healthier person, a more engaged employee, and a more aware human being. That version surfaces briefly whenever the alcohol is removed and disappears reliably whenever the alcohol returns. A psychologist would observe that the existence of this potential makes Homer's alcoholism not just a behavioral pattern but a genuine tragedy, because it means the person he could be is always there, always present, always possible, and always prevented from emerging by the substance that has claimed his evenings, his judgment, and his emotional life for more than 30 years. The Mr. Lisa's Opus episode from season 29 adds another dimension to this picture. When Lisa intervenes and Homer agrees to stop drinking with Ned Flanders as his sponsor, he succeeds. The marriage is saved, the family stabilizes, the crisis passes, but the sobriety is achieved for Lisa and for Marge, not for Homer himself. He stops drinking because his daughter told him his wife was going to leave. He does not stop because he has internalized a belief that sobriety would be better for his own life. A psychologist would note this distinction as critically important because externally motivated sobriety maintained for other people rather than for oneself, is inherently fragile. It depends on the continued presence and pressure of the people it was undertaken for. If Marge stops expressing dissatisfaction, if Lisa stops intervening, if the external crisis that triggered the sobriety resolves, then the motivation for staying sober dissolves along with it. Homer has never demonstrated internally motivated sobriety, a genuine personal conviction that his life is better without alcohol, sustained long enough to produce permanent change. And without that internal motivation, every period of sobriety is temporary, a pause in the drinking rather than an end to it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. These patterns of denial and intermittent self-awareness raise a deeper question that a psychologist would want to explore. If Homer's not drinking to numb extraordinary pain like so many fictional alcoholics are, then what is the drinking actually medicating? What psychological needs is the alcohol quietly serving beneath the surface of what appears to be simple habit? Alcohol as self-medication. A psychologist observing Homer would recognize that even though his alcoholism does not originate from a single devastating trauma, the alcohol still serves as self-medication for a constellation of chronic psychological discomforts that Homer has never learned to address through healthier means. Self-medication does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a man who drinks a beer every night because the alternative is sitting with feelings he has no vocabulary for and no tools to manage. Homer's drinking medicates something real, even if that something is quieter and less cinematic than the existential despair or shattering loss that drives characters like Rick Sanchez to the bottle. The first thing Homer appears to be medicating is chronic dissatisfaction with his own life and his own limitations. Homer's not a stupid man in the way the show sometimes portrays him. He is a man with limited education, limited opportunities, and limited skills for self-reflection, trapped in a job he does not enjoy, living a life that falls short of whatever vague aspirations he may have had as a younger man. When he was chemically sober during the anti-booze injection episode, he said he never got to be the person he wanted to be. That statement reveals that Homer carries an awareness of unfulfilled potential somewhere inside him, an awareness that his life has not matched his hopes. That awareness, when it surfaces, is painful. It forces him to confront the gap between who he is and who he might have been. The alcohol keeps that awareness suppressed, blurred, manageable. It transforms dissatisfaction into contentment, or at least into numbness, which for Homer may be the same thing. A psychologist would recognize this as a very common pattern in people who self-medicate with alcohol. They are not necessarily running from one specific source of pain. They are running from a general, ambient sense that their life is not enough, that they are not enough, that somewhere along the way things went wrong in ways they cannot articulate or fix, and that sitting with that feeling sober is simply too uncomfortable to sustain. The second thing Homer appears to be medicating is social anxiety and emotional inadequacy that he cannot name or acknowledge openly. Despite his outgoing and often gregarious personality, Homer consistently struggles in situations that require genuine emotional presence, vulnerability, or sophisticated social navigation. He cannot have the kind of adult conversation Marge craves at a restaurant. He cannot express his love for his family in clear, direct, sober language. He cannot participate in therapy, as the Pickle Rick parallel in Rick Sanchez demonstrates so clearly in another show, because therapy requires the kind of honest self-examination that terrifies him. The alcohol provides him with a version of social ease that is convincing on the surface, but that lacks the depth of genuine emotional connection. He can be funny at the bar, he can tell stories, he can be Homer, but the version of himself he presents while drinking is a performance of ease rather than actual ease, and the alcohol makes the performance possible by lowering his inhibitions and quieting the internal voice that might otherwise tell him he's out of his depth in social situations that require more than jokes and loudness. The third thing Homer appears to be medicating is boredom, and this is perhaps the most underappreciated driver of his drinking. Homer's life, stripped of the adventures that the show's plots provide, is repetitive and monotonous. He goes to the same job every day, he comes home to the same house, he has the same conversations, he watches the same television. The routine of his existence is stultifying in a way that many real adults recognize but rarely discuss honestly, because admitting to being bored with your life feels like admitting to failure. The alcohol transforms this monotony into something tolerable. It adds warmth and color to evenings that might otherwise feel empty. It makes the television funnier. It makes the couch more comfortable. It makes the repetition of daily life feel less oppressive. A psychologist would observe that boredom-driven drinking is one of the most common forms of self-medication and one of the hardest to address. Because the underlying problem, a life that feels insufficiently stimulating, requires restructuring entire patterns of living rather than simply removing a substance. If you take away the beer and leave everything else exactly the same, you're left with a sober man sitting on the same couch, watching the same television, in the same house, feeling the same emptiness, except now without the chemical warmth that made the emptiness tolerable. The fourth thing Homer appears to be medicating is a profound and largely unacknowledged fear of inadequacy as a husband and father. Homer knows at some level that he is not the husband Marge deserves. He knows he is not the father his children need. He can see in his better moments that his family would benefit from a more present, more engaged, more emotionally available version of himself. But becoming that version feels impossible because it would require skills and capacities he has never developed, and the prospect of trying and failing, of attempting to be a better man and discovering that he cannot sustain the effort, may feel worse than simply remaining the flawed but familiar version of himself that everyone has already adjusted to. The alcohol provides distance from this fear. It numbs the inadequacy. It blurs the gap between who he is and who his family needs. A psychologist would note that self-medication for feelings of inadequacy is particularly self-defeating, because the substance that numbs the feelings also impairs the functioning that might reduce them. Homer drinks because he feels inadequate as a father. The drinking makes him a worse father. Being a worse father intensifies the feelings of inadequacy. And the cycle deepens with each revolution, each year adding another layer to the pattern without ever addressing the feelings at its center. A psychologist would observe that the cumulative effect of these self-medication patterns is a man who has organized his psychological life around avoidance. Homer avoids confronting his dissatisfaction with his life. He avoids confronting his emotional limitations. He avoids confronting the monotony of his routine. He avoids confronting his inadequacy as a husband and father. And alcohol is the primary tool that makes all of this avoidance possible. Without it, he would have to face these uncomfortable truths directly, which might be painful in the short term, but could potentially lead to growth, change, and improvement in the long term. With alcohol, he can keep all of these truths at a comfortable distance, perpetually aware of them at some peripheral level, but never forced to deal with them in ways that might lead to genuine change. Before we move on, we move. Make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This understanding of Homer's drinking as self-medication for chronic psychological discomfort connects to a broader pattern that runs through his entire character: the gap between the Homer the world sees and the Homer who exists in his private moments of unguarded honesty. The public Homer versus the private Homer. A psychologist observing Homer would note that there is a meaningful difference between the Homer who performs for others and the Homer who exists in his quieter, less observed moments. The public Homer is loud, confident, impulsive, seemingly unbothered by his failures and cheerfully oblivious to his own limitations. This is the Homer the world sees, the Homer who charges into situations without thought, who makes jokes when seriousness is called for, who brushes off criticism with a laugh or a shrug, who projects an air of indestructible contentment that suggests nothing in his life truly bothers him or causes him lasting pain. But the private Homer surfaces in specific moments across the series, and when he does, a very different person becomes visible. The private Homer is the one who panics about his marriage when he sees the Van Houten's divorce and realizes his own marriage might not be as secure as he assumed. The private Homer is the one who tells Marge that he can offer her nothing but complete and total dependence. The private Homer is the one who, during his sober period as Duffman, sees for the first time the damage alcohol causes and genuinely tries to help others see it too. The private Homer is the one who, during forced chemical sobriety, admits that he never got to be the person he wanted to be. The alcohol plays a crucial role in maintaining the gap between these two versions of Homer, the public. Homer needs the drinking to sustain his performance of easy confidence and untroubled cheerfulness. Without alcohol loosening his inhibitions and numbing his self-awareness, the performance would be harder to maintain. He would feel more acutely the ways in which his life falls short of what he wants. He would notice more clearly the disappointment in Marge's eyes during the moments he fails to be present. He would feel more intensely the fear that he is not good enough for the people who depend on him. The alcohol keeps the public Homer's performance running smoothly by suppressing the private Homer's uncomfortable truths. The private Homer, meanwhile, only surfaces when the alcohol's grip weakens or when external circumstances break through the chemical barrier. During sobriety, the private Homer can see clearly. During moments of crisis, when the stakes are too high for alcohol to fully suppress awareness, the private Homer breaks through. During quiet moments late at night, when the beer has worn off and the house is dark and Homer is lying in bed next to Marge, the private Homer may be looking at the ceiling and thinking thoughts that the public Homer would never say out loud because saying them would require admitting vulnerability, admitting need, admitting that the cheerful, simple, beer-loving Homer is a character he performs rather than the whole truth of who he is. A psychologist would observe that this gap between public and private self is common in people with chronic alcohol dependency. The drinking creates and sustains a version of the self that is functional enough for public consumption, but that lacks the depth, the vulnerability, and the authenticity of the person who exists beneath the performance. The private self carries truths that the public self cannot afford to acknowledge because acknowledging them would require change. And change would require sobriety, and sobriety would require facing all of the things that the drinking was hired to suppress in the first place. The performance continues because the alternative, dropping the performance and being genuinely, vulnerably, soberly himself with the people who love him, feels more dangerous to Homer than any of the physical or social risk he takes while intoxicated. The moments when the private Homer surfaces are among the most emotionally striking in the show's history. They land with force precisely because they contrast so sharply with the public Homer the audience spends most of their time with. When Homer admits he cannot survive without Marge, when he says he never got to be who he wanted to be, when he looks at the barflies and chooses to go home instead of drinking, these moments feel significant because they represent the real Homer breaking through the alcohol's suppression, The actual person glimpsed briefly through a crack in the performance before the crack seals itself, and the duff is open, and the public Homer returns with his easy laugh and his comfortable obliviousness. A psychologist would note that the existence of this private Homer is ultimately what makes his alcoholism tragic rather than simply clinical. If Homer were truly the simple, unbothered, cheerfully oblivious man his public performance suggests, his drinking would be less consequential. But the private Homer reveals that beneath the performance, there is a man who carries awareness, who feels inadequacy, who recognizes lost potential, and who possesses a capacity for love and insight that the drinking holds permanently below the surface. The private Homer is always there, always waiting, always hoping that today might be the day the performance ends and the real work of living begins. And the public Homer keeps pouring another beer, because the real work of living feels harder than the comfortable fiction of the bar stool, and because nobody in his world is asking him to choose differently with the kind of sustained, patient, loving persistence that might actually make the difference. The relationship between Homer's public and private selves also shapes how he relates to the one person in his life who consistently sees through the performance. Lisa Simpson, more than any other character in the show, perceives the gap between who Homer is and who Homer could be. She is the one who goes to Mose to tell him his marriage is in danger. She's the one who designs science fair projects and builds grammar-correcting robots while Homer pours beer into them. She's the one whose intelligence and moral clarity serve as a constant, quiet rebuke to the life Homer has settled for. And Homer knows this. On some level, he is aware that Lisa represents the potential he never realized, and that his drinking is part of why he never realized it. His relationship with his daughter is colored by this awareness in ways that surface occasionally in moments of tenderness or guilt that he cannot sustain for long before the public Homer reasserts himself and the moment passes. A psychologist would note that the father-daughter dynamic between Homer and Lisa contains echoes of a pattern well documented in families affected by alcoholism. The highly perceptive child who sees the parent clearly, who understands intuitively what the drinking is costing the family, and who takes on the emotional burden of that understanding because no one else in the family system is willing or able to carry it. Lisa carries the weight of seeing Homer truthfully, and that weight has shaped her personality, her anxieties, her precocious maturity, and her persistent sense that she does not quite belong in the family she was born into. She loves her father. She sees his potential. She grieves in her own quiet way for the version of him that the drinking prevents from fully emerging. And she has learned through years of watching brief sobriety episodes end in resumed drinking that her father's potential may never be realized, that the Homer she catches glimpses of in sober moments may never become the Homer she gets to have permanently. This dynamic between Homer and Lisa represents one of the most psychologically authentic elements of the show's treatment of alcoholism, because it captures something that clinical literature consistently emphasizes about the impact of parental drinking on children. The damage is not always dramatic, it is not always visible. Sometimes it takes the form of a brilliant child who learned too early that the adults in her life cannot be relied upon to see clearly, to act wisely, or to sustain the changes that love and insight occasionally inspire. Sometimes it takes the form of a daughter who loves her father enormously and has quietly accepted that the father she has is not the father she deserves, and that no amount of intervention or intelligence or love on her part is likely to change that permanently. The episode where Homer opens a bar in his garage after Moe transforms his tavern into a nightclub reveals another dimension of Homer's psychology that connects his public performance. His private needs and his drinking into a single revealing picture. When Homer loses access to Moe's, he does not grieve for the alcohol. Alcohol is available everywhere. He grieves for the environment, for the specific social architecture of the bar that provided him with a place where the public Homer could exist without challenge and without demand for depth. The garage bar he creates is not just a place to drink, It is a reconstruction of the entire social system that his drinking depends on. He rebuilds the stools, the counter, the dynamic of bartender and customer, the atmosphere of low-stakes male companionship that asked nothing of him beyond showing up and being present in the shallowest possible sense of the word. A psychologist would observe that Homer is not addicted only to alcohol. He is addicted to the entire ecosystem that alcohol creates and inhabits. The place, the people, the routine, the emotional temperature, the permission to be less than he could be without anyone noticing or caring. Removing the substance without removing the ecosystem would leave Homer disoriented and searching for a replacement. Removing the ecosystem without removing the substance would send Homer searching for a new bar. The addiction is systemic, not merely chemical. And this is why it has proven so resistant to the periodic challenges that have been mounted against it over 35 years. The garage bar becomes popular with working-class duff drinkers almost immediately. It attracts the same kind of people, the same kind of energy, the same kind of interaction that Moe's provided. Homer has successfully replicated his addiction environment in his own home, which means his family now lives inside the bar rather than being separated from it by the distance between Evergreen Terrace and Moe's Tavern. His children walk past the drinking. His wife sees it happening in her own garage. The boundary between Homer's drinking life and his family life, which was already thin, has been eliminated entirely. A psychologist would observe that this erosion of boundaries between the drinking environment and the family environment represents an escalation of the addiction's reach into Homer's life, even if it does not represent an increase in the amount he drinks. The addiction is expanding its territory, claiming more of the physical and psychological space that the family inhabits, and doing so with Homer's enthusiastic participation and the family's weary acceptance. Meanwhile, Moe discovers that his trendy nightclub has replaced his authentic connections with superficial interactions from patrons who will not have genuine conversations with him and who are easily offended by his working-class manners. He goes to Homer's garage bar, where he finds warmth, familiarity, and the band REM playing for the crowd. The scene captures something true about the psychology of bar culture and its relationship to addiction. The bar provides real things that people genuinely need: connection, belonging, acceptance, ease. The problem is not that these things are false or worthless. The problem is that they are delivered through a medium that simultaneously degrades the person's health, impairs their judgment, and prevents them from developing the internal resources to access connection, belonging, acceptance, and ease without chemical assistance. Homer's garage bar gives everyone what they want in the moment, and it takes from everyone slowly and invisibly the things they need for the long term. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This understanding of the gap between Homer's public and private selves and the way alcohol sustains that gap while preventing genuine integration connects directly to the question of why Homer returns to drinking every time despite seeing the benefits of stopping. It brings us to the psychology of denial and the moments of self-awareness that fail to produce lasting change. Denial and self-awareness. A psychologist observing Homer Simpson would note that despite overwhelming and repeated evidence that his drinking is a serious problem affecting every area of his life, Homer rarely, if ever, sustains the acknowledgement that he is an alcoholic or that he needs professional help for his drinking. This denial is not simple ignorance. Homer has been shown the evidence. He has experienced the benefits of sobriety. He has been told by family members that his drinking creates problems. He has attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Albeit briefly, he has had his license revoked for drunk driving. He has seen what alcohol does to Barney Gumble. He has observed the damage Duff beer causes to Springfield while he was sober as Duffman. And yet, none of this accumulated evidence has produced a durable shift in how Homer understands his own relationship with alcohol. The denial persists through everything, bending but never breaking, absorbing each new piece of evidence without allowing it to alter the fundamental narrative Homer tells himself about who he is and what his drinking means. The Duffless episode from Season 4 provides the clearest illustration of how Homer's denial system operates in the face of direct confrontation. When Homer is forced to attend AA meetings after his drunk driving arrest, his very first experience in the program triggers a flight response. Reverend Lovejoy explains that after completing the program, Homer will never drink another beer. Homer screams and leaves the room. He does not stay to hear why permanent sobriety might be beneficial. He does not engage with the other members of the group who might share their own experiences of what life without alcohol has given them. He hears the words, "never drink again," and his body moves him toward the exit before his mind can process any argument for why those words might represent something hopeful rather than terrifying. A psychologist would observe that this reaction reveals the depth of Homer's psychological attachment to alcohol. The denial is not just intellectual, it is embodied. His nervous system treats the prospect of permanent sobriety as a danger to be fled from, and it executes the escape before conscious reasoning can intervene. Later in the same episode, Homer confesses during a subsequent AA meeting that his desperation for alcohol drove him to sneak into a football stadium and suck the dirt underneath the bleachers, hoping to find traces of spilled beer in the soil. He is kicked out of the AA meeting for this behavior. A psychologist would observe that this moment contains two contradictory psychological truths operating simultaneously. First, Homer's behavior, drinking from dirty soil because he cannot go without alcohol, is objectively the behavior of someone with severe alcohol dependency. Second, Homer appears to view this behavior as slightly embarrassing but essentially reasonable, as a funny story to tell at an AA meeting rather than as evidence that his relationship with alcohol has reached a crisis level requiring serious intervention. His denial allows him to perform the behavior of an addict and narrate the behavior of an addict without internalizing the identity of an addict. He can describe what he did under the bleachers and still walk out of that meeting room believing he is fundamentally different from the other people in it. The famous closing toast from Homer versus the 18th Amendment provides perhaps the most psychologically complex moment of self-awareness in the entire series. To alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. In this single sentence, Homer articulates a truth about his relationship with drinking that a therapist might spend months trying to help a patient reach. He recognizes that alcohol causes problems. He recognizes that he uses alcohol to manage those same problems. He recognizes the circular, self-defeating nature of this pattern. And he raises his glass to it. He toasts it. He honors it. He wraps the insight in warmth and humor and celebration, which allows the insight to exist without requiring any action. A psychologist would note that this is a profoundly sophisticated form of denial, a denial that incorporates truthful observation while preventing that truth from leading to change. Homer can acknowledge the paradox of his drinking without feeling compelled to resolve it, because the acknowledgement itself becomes the end point rather than the beginning of a process of change. He said the thing, he recognized the pattern, and now he can continue drinking with the comfortable feeling that he has dealt with it, that he sees himself clearly even though nothing about his behavior has changed or will change. The episode from season 29 where Lisa intervenes to save her parents' marriage shows another dimension of Homer's relationship with self-awareness about his drinking. When Homer promises Lisa that he will stop drinking and calls Ned Flanders as his sponsor, his motivation comes entirely from outside himself. He does not wake up one morning and decide that his drinking is destroying his life. His daughter tells him that his wife is going to leave, and the fear of losing Marge drives him to make a promise that he then keeps. A psychologist would observe that this kind of externally triggered awareness is fragile precisely because it depends on the continued intensity of the external pressure. If Lisa had not intervened, if the threat to the marriage had not been made explicit, Homer would have continued drinking without any awareness that a crisis was approaching. His own internal monitoring systems did not detect the danger. His own capacity for self-reflection did not generate the insight. Someone else had to see the problem, communicate the problem, and motivate the response to the problem because Homer's denial prevented him from performing any of these functions for himself. The season 33 anti-booze injection episode provides the most dramatic confrontation between Homer's capacity for self-awareness and his default state of denial. When Homer has been chemically sober for 3 months and is offered the antidote that would allow him to drink again, his initial refusal reveals genuine self-knowledge that his drinking self is unable to access. He says he never got to be the person he wanted to be. This statement acknowledges that Homer has a vision of who he could be, that he is aware of the gap between who he is and who he wants to be, and that he understands alcohol is the primary reason that gap exists. In that moment, chemically freed from the fog of daily drinking, Homer can see himself with clarity that is normally unavailable to him. He knows. He genuinely knows. And then the antidote is administered, and the knowing recedes. He returns to the version of himself that cannot see what the sober version could see so clearly. A psychologist would find this sequence devastating because it demonstrates that the insight is not absent from Homer. It is present but suppressed. It surfaces when the chemical barriers are removed and disappears when they return. The capacity for change exists within Homer. What does not exist is a sustained period of sobriety long enough for that capacity to become permanent, and an environment willing to support that sustained sobriety rather than restoring the comfortable dysfunction that everyone around him has adapted to. A psychologist would also observe that nobody in Homer's life serves as a consistent, persistent voice challenging his denial over time. Marge challenges episodically but does not maintain sustained pressure. Lisa intervenes in acute crises but does not campaign for permanent change. Bart does not engage with the drinking as a problem. Maggie is too young to articulate what she observes. Mo profits from the drinking. Lenny, Carl, and Barney participate in it. Mr. Burns ignores it. Dr. Hibbert does not treat it with adequate seriousness. The community celebrates it. There is no voice in Homer's life that says, consistently and repeatedly over time, you have a drinking problem and you need help, and I'm not going to stop saying this until you get help. Without that sustained external challenge, Homer's denial operates in a near vacuum of accountability, maintained not just by his own psychological defenses, but by the collective silence of every person and institution in his environment. The interaction between Homer's occasional moments of genuine insight and his default state of denial creates one of the most psychologically realistic portrayals of addiction on television, perhaps without the show's creators fully intending it. Real addiction does not consist of people who are completely unaware that they have a problem. It consists of people who have glimpses of awareness, sometimes vivid and painful glimpses, that are then submerged by the combined weight of dependency, habit, environmental reinforcement, and inadequate support for change. Homer is not ignorant about what alcohol does to him. He is intermittently aware, which is in many ways worse than complete ignorance because it means he has seen the truth and returned to the lie voluntarily. Not because the truth was hidden from him, but because the truth was not enough to overcome everything else. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. These patterns of denial and intermittent awareness create the context for understanding the long-term patterns that have accumulated across more than 3 decades of Homer's drinking. Patterns that reveal how addiction becomes a stable system that resists change even as consequences accumulate around it. Long-term patterns and accumulated consequences. A psychologist observing Homer Simpson across the full 35-season run of The Simpsons would note something that the show's episodic structure tends to obscure. When you step back from individual episodes and look at the full arc of Homer's life, his alcoholism has not changed. It has not gotten worse in any dramatic way. It has not gotten better. It has not evolved or developed or responded to the countless experiences that might reasonably have produced modification. It has simply persisted, steady and unchanging, like the hum of a machine that has been running so long that everyone in the house has stopped hearing it. From the earliest episodes in Season 1 through the most recent seasons, Homer drinks at approximately the same level, with the same frequency, at the same locations, in the same social context, producing the same general consequences. He goes to Moe's, he drinks Duff on the couch, he attends family events while consuming alcohol. He makes impaired decisions, he creates minor and occasionally major crises through his drinking. And then the episode ends and the next episode begins and the pattern continues without interruption or modification. A psychologist would find this consistency across decades to be one of the most significant aspects of Homer's portrayal because it reflects how severe alcohol dependency actually functions in real life. It does not resolve itself, it does not gradually improve, it does not respond to accumulating evidence of harm. It persists as a stable system, maintained by habit, reinforced by environment, protected by denial, and enabled by accommodation, until and unless something forceful enough to disrupt the system intervenes and is sustained long enough to create permanent change. For Homer, that disruption has never come, and so the pattern continues. The consequences of this unchanging pattern have accumulated over 3 decades in ways the show rarely addresses directly because the episodic format resets consequences after each episode. But a psychologist would note that in reality, 35 years of daily heavy drinking would produce cumulative effects across every domain of a person's life, and many of these effects would be irreversible by the time they were recognized. Homer's physical health has been living under the weight of chronic alcohol consumption for his entire adult life. While the show does not typically depict realistic health consequences, a psychologist would observe that in reality, decades of drinking at Homer's levels would produce liver damage, cardiovascular problems, neurological deterioration, immune system suppression, and increased vulnerability to multiple forms of cancer. The physical price of Homer's drinking is being paid continuously, even if it is not depicted on screen, and it increases with every year the drinking continues. Homer's marriage has been permanently shaped by his alcoholism. Marge has spent her entire married life with a husband whose evenings frequently belong to a bar rather than to her, whose emotional availability is limited by chronic intoxication, whose judgment is impaired in ways that create recurring family crises, and whose capacity for intimacy and genuine presence is diminished by the constant buffer of alcohol between himself and authentic emotional experience. She is adapted to this reality because it is the only version of her marriage she has ever known. But adaptation is not the same as satisfaction. Marge has made peace with a version of marriage that is diminished by alcohol, not because she chose it, but because the alternative, sustained confrontation or departure, felt impossible or too costly. Homer's children have grown up entirely within the context of their father's alcoholism, and the effects on their psychological development are visible in who they have become. Lisa's hyper-responsibility, her role as the family's conscience, her precocious maturity, and her chronic frustration with the adults around her all bear the marks of a child who grew up in a household where one parent's drinking required the other family members to compensate by performing emotional and practical functions that the drinking parent could not reliably provide. Bart's behavioral problems, his defiance, his need for attention, his comfort with risk, and his indifference to authority can all be understood, at least partially, as the adaptations of a child who did not receive consistent, engaged fathering during his formative years. Maggie's relative invisibility and silence echo the position of the youngest child in an alcoholic family system. The child who learned early that the household's emotional bandwidth was already allocated to managing the drinking parent's behavior and its consequences, leaving little room for the youngest child's needs to be noticed and addressed. Homer's friendships have remained structurally dependent on the bar for their entire duration. He has known Lenny, Carl, and Barney for decades, and they have spent the vast majority of their shared time together in Moe's tavern drinking. The friendships are real in the sense that these men care about each other and share genuine bonds. But the friendships are also limited by their context. Homer does not go hiking with Lenny. He does not have long, sober conversations with Carl about their lives and their dreams. He does not cook dinner with Barney at anyone's home. The friendships exist within the walls of the bar, fueled by alcohol, and they have never been tested by sustained sobriety. A psychologist would observe that friendships formed and maintained exclusively within drinking environments often cannot survive the removal of alcohol, because the shared activity of drinking is the structural foundation of the relationship rather than merely an accompaniment to it. If Homer ever got permanently sober, he might discover that some of his closest friendships do not have a foundation strong enough to support themselves without alcohol as the glue. Homer's career has been permanently limited by his drinking in ways he has never had to confront because Mr. Burns does not hold him accountable. He has worked at the Springfield nuclear power plant for decades in the same position, with no advancement, no development, and no trajectory. His performance is consistently poor. His attention is frequently impaired. His motivation is minimal. A psychologist would observe that Homer's career stagnation is at least partially attributable to the cognitive and motivational effects of chronic heavy drinking. The brain resources that might have been directed toward professional development, toward learning new skills, toward pursuing advancement, have been directed instead toward maintaining his drinking routine and recovering from its effects. The sobriety episodes demonstrate that Homer is capable of better performance and even promotion when alcohol is removed. The implication is that his entire career has been operating below its potential because of his drinking, and that the professional version of Homer that exists as potential has never been allowed to emerge for long enough to produce permanent career change. The most significant long-term consequence may be the one that is hardest to measure but most important to acknowledge. It is the accumulated weight of a life lived below its potential. Every day that Homer spends drinking at Moe's is a day he did not spend reading to Maggie. Every evening spent on the couch with a Duff is an evening he did not spend having a real conversation with Marge. Every Sunday afternoon spent at the bar is an afternoon he did not spend teaching Bart something worthwhile or supporting Lisa's interest. Every dollar spent on beer is a dollar not spent on his children's education or his family's security. These individual moments of lost opportunity may seem trivial in isolation, but accumulated across 35 years, they represent a staggering quantity of lost presence, lost connection, and lost experience that Homer can never recover, and that his family can never get back. A psychologist would observe that the long-term cost of addiction is not just measured in health problems, financial losses, and damaged relationships. It is measured in the unlived life, the version of existence that was possible, but that the substance prevented from ever materializing. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. These long-term patterns and accumulated consequences across decades of storytelling lead to the final question, the one that ties everything together. What does Homer Simpson's alcoholism actually reveal about him as a character, about the show that created him, and about how our culture understands and processes addiction? What Homer's alcoholism reveals. After examining Homer's alcoholism across all of these dimensions, his drinking as a narrative constant, his use of alcohol for emotional regulation, its effects on his marriage and his fatherhood, the enabling architecture of Moe's Tavern, the mirror of Barney that he refuses to look into, the cognitive effects that chronic drinking produces, the normalization of his addiction by his community, the brief windows of sobriety that reveal who he could be, the denial that prevents lasting change, and the long-term patterns that have accumulated across more than 3 decades. A psychologist would step back and consider what Homer's alcoholism reveals about him as a character and about the human experiences the show explores through his particular and peculiar kind of struggle. The first thing Homer's alcoholism reveals is that addiction does not require a dramatic origin story. This is perhaps the most important distinction between Homer Simpson and other fictional portrayals of alcoholism in popular culture. Many television shows and films depict alcoholism as the result of devastating trauma, of unbearable loss, of existential despair so profound that the person turns to alcohol because their pain leaves them no other option. Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty drinks because he is a genius who has seen the meaninglessness of infinite universes and who carries the weight of losing his family. Walter White turns to extreme behavior because of a terminal cancer diagnosis. Tony Soprano drinks and eats compulsively because of the impossible contradictions of his life as a mob boss and family man. These characters have reasons for their substance use that feel proportional to the severity of their consumption. Their backstories explain and to some degree justify why they turn to the bottle. Homer Simpson has no such backstory. He is not drinking because of some devastating trauma that the show eventually reveals in a flashback. He is not numbing existential pain or processing unbearable loss. He drinks because it is what he has always done. He drinks because his father drank. He drinks because his friends drink. He drinks because the bar is on his way home from work. He drinks because the beer tastes good and the couch is comfortable and the television is on, and nobody has ever given him a compelling enough reason to stop combined with enough sustained support to make stopping possible. A psychologist would observe that this portrayal is arguably the most realistic depiction of alcoholism on television precisely because it lacks the dramatic justification that most fictional portrayals provide. The vast majority of real-world alcoholism does not begin with devastating trauma or existential despair. It begins with habit. It begins with environment. It begins with a father who modeled drinking as normal, with friends who drink together as their primary social activity, with a culture that celebrates alcohol and provides easy access to it, and with the absence of healthier coping skills that might provide alternatives. Homer's alcoholism is ordinary, and that ordinariness is what makes it both more realistic and more insidious than the dramatic versions that populate most fiction. The second thing Homer's alcoholism reveals is how comedy can normalize addiction in ways that prevent both the characters and the audience from taking it seriously. Homer's drinking is played for laughs. His beer belly is a visual gag. His antics, while intoxicated, are comedic set pieces. His love of Duff beer is a running joke that has been merchandised onto t-shirts, mugs, and countless pieces of memorabilia. The audience laughs at Homer's drinking the same way the audience laughs at his incompetence at work, his arguments with Bart, and his general foolishness. The drinking is woven into the fabric of the comedy so thoroughly that extracting it and examining it as a serious condition feels almost like a violation of the show's tone. A psychologist would observe that this comedic framing mirrors exactly how alcoholism is normalized in real families and real communities. When the drinking is treated as funny, when it becomes a character quirk rather than a medical condition, when the consequences are played for laughs rather than acknowledged as genuine harm, the seriousness of the addiction becomes invisible. Everyone can see it. Nobody treats it as a problem. And the person at the center of it continues drinking because the social environment has defined their drinking as entertainment rather than as illness. Homer's alcoholism is hiding in plain sight, disguised as comedy, and the disguise is so effective that even careful viewers of the show may never have thought about his drinking as a condition worthy of clinical examination until someone points it out explicitly. The third thing Homer's alcoholism reveals is the tragedy of the good enough life. Homer's not miserable. This is important to understand. He has a wife who loves him. He has children who, despite everything, love him too. He has friends who enjoy his company. He has a house on Evergreen Terrace. He has a job that, while not fulfilling, provides a steady income. His life is not in crisis. It is not falling apart. It is adequate. It functions. And that adequacy is precisely what prevents the kind of rock-bottom crisis that many narratives of addiction use as the catalyst for recovery. Homer never hits rock bottom because his floor is high enough to prevent a fatal fall. His marriage survives, his children adapt, his employer retains him, his community accommodates him. He is comfortable enough to avoid the desperation that might drive him to seek help, and functional enough to avoid the catastrophic consequences that might force others to intervene on his behalf. A psychologist would note that this good enough existence is one of the most common and most durable barriers to recovery in real-world alcoholism. When life is tolerable with the drinking, when the consequences are chronic but not acute, when things are not good but not bad enough to demand change, the person can continue drinking indefinitely, decades passing, potential dissolving, relationships slowly degrading, health gradually declining, and the drinking persists because nothing has gotten bad enough to overcome the inertia of long-established habit and the comfort of familiar dysfunction. The fourth thing Homer's alcoholism reveals is the gap between knowledge and action that defines so much of human psychological struggle. Homer knows that alcohol causes problems. He said so in his famous toast. He has experienced the benefits of sobriety multiple times. He has been told by his daughter that his drinking was about to cost him his marriage. He has acknowledged, while chemically sober, that he never got to be the person he wanted to be because of alcohol. He has seen what drinking does to Barney, to Springfield, and to himself. He knows, on some level that surfaces periodically and then submerges again, he genuinely knows, and he drinks anyway. A psychologist would observe that this gap between knowing and doing is not unique to addiction. It is one of the fundamental features of human psychology. People know they should exercise and do not exercise. People know they should save money and do not save money. People know they should be kinder to the people they love and are not kinder to the people they love. But in the context of addiction, this gap takes on particular significance because the substance itself actively impairs the cognitive and motivational systems that would be needed to close the gap. Homer knows he should stop drinking, but the drinking impairs his ability to sustain the motivation, the planning, the follow-through, and the emotional tolerance that stopping would require. The very thing he needs to change is the thing preventing him from changing. And this self-reinforcing trap is what makes addiction one of the most challenging psychological conditions that human beings face. The fifth thing Homer's alcoholism reveals is something about the show itself and about how American popular culture processes the reality of addiction. The Simpsons has been on the air for 35 years. It has addressed virtually every social issue of the late 20th and early 21st century. It has satirized politics, religion, education, healthcare, corporate greed, celebrity culture, media, technology, and countless other aspects of modern American life. And yet it has never consistently and seriously addressed the alcoholism of its main character as a condition that deserves the same sustained, thoughtful treatment that it has given to other social issues. Homer's drinking is always present but rarely examined. It is always visible but rarely treated as a problem worthy of the show's considerable intelligence and moral insight. A psychologist would observe that this gap between the show's willingness to address other issues seriously and its unwillingness to do the same with Homer's alcoholism mirrors a broader cultural pattern. American society is remarkably comfortable depicting alcohol use in entertainment, in advertising, in social contexts, and in daily life, while simultaneously maintaining an uncomfortable silence about the scale and severity of alcohol use disorders within the population. Homer's drinking is the elephant in Springfield's living room, and the show's reluctance to address it with the seriousness it addresses other topics reflects a cultural reluctance to look too closely at how much of our social fabric is woven around a substance that quietly damages millions of lives. The sixth and final thing Homer's alcoholism reveals is perhaps the most important, and it is the thing that makes his character resonate with audiences at a level that goes beyond comedy or social commentary. Homer is a deeply human character. His alcoholism is part of what makes him human, not because drinking is inherently human, but because the struggles his alcoholism represents, the struggle to cope with a life that is not what you imagined, the struggle to be present for the people you love when you do not know how, the struggle to change a pattern you know is harmful when everything around you supports its continuation, the struggle between the person you are and the person you wish you could be. These are universal struggles that extend far beyond addiction to alcohol. Everyone has something in their life that they know they should change but have not changed. Everyone has a version of Moe's Tavern, a place or a habit or a pattern that provides comfort while preventing growth. Everyone has experienced the gap between insight and action, between knowing what the right thing to do is and actually doing it consistently enough for it to matter. Homer Simpson's alcoholism takes these universal human struggles and makes them visible through the specific and familiar lens of a man with a beer in his hand. His drinking is ordinary, his denial is ordinary, his enabling environment is ordinary, his moments of insight that fail to produce lasting change are ordinary, and it is precisely this ordinariness that makes Homer's portrayal of alcoholism one of the most psychologically significant in television history, because it reveals that addiction does not require extraordinary circumstances. It only requires a person, a substance, and a world that has stopped noticing. Homer's famous toast echoes in the mind as we reach the end of this examination. To alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. He said it with warmth. He said it with humor. He said it with the unmistakable tone of a man who has made peace with a contradiction he does not expect to resolve. And in that single sentence, Homer Simpson said more about the psychology of alcoholism than most textbooks manage in 300 pages. He knows it causes his problems. He knows he uses it to manage those problems. He knows the circle is unbroken and will likely remain unbroken. And he toasts it anyway because toasting is easier than changing, and because the beer is cold and the bar is warm and his friends are here, and the walk home is short and tomorrow will look exactly like today. And that is perhaps the most important thing a psychologist would observe about Homer Simpson's relationship with alcohol. Not that it is extraordinary, but that it is completely, devastatingly ordinary. It looks like a man on a bar stool. It looks like a beer after work. It looks like a wife who has stopped expecting things to be different. It looks like children who have adapted to what their father can give rather than what they need. It looks like a community that has normalized what should concern it. It looks like a life that works well enough to continue, but not well enough to satisfy the quiet voice that surfaces occasionally in moments of sobriety and says, "I never got to be the person I wanted to be." That voice is real. It lives inside Homer somewhere beneath the duff and the denial and the decades of established habit. It surfaced in Duffless. It surfaced in Waiting for Duffman. It surfaced when the anti-booze injection cleared his system and he could see himself clearly for the first time in years. It is always there. It is always waiting. And it is always pushed back down by the next beer, the next night at Moe's, the next episode that resets the consequences and returns Homer to his baseline state of comfortable, functional, quiet addiction. A psychologist would look at Homer Simpson and see not a cartoon character, but a case study in how ordinary alcoholism functions. How it starts with habit and grows into dependency. How it reshapes a marriage without ending it. How it diminishes a father without removing him. How it captures a community without alarming it. How it consumes a life without appearing to damage it. And how it persists year after year, decade after decade, episode after episode, not because the person is weak or foolish or incapable of better, but because the substance and the system and the silence have arranged themselves so perfectly that change, while always possible, is never quite probable enough to actually happen. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.